Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom Ha'amidenu Malkeinu Lechaim Uthros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha V'taknenu B'yetza Tova Milifonecha V'hoshi'enu L'man Shemecha V'hagen ba'adenu V'haser me'aleinu Oyev, dever, t'cherev V'ra'ov, v'yagon V'yaser Satan milfonenu u'me'achareinu U'v'tzel kenafecha tastirenu Ki el shomereinu u'matzileinu ata Ki el melech Hanon v'rachom
Good day, good evening, whenever it may be that you might be exposed to this opportunity to remember a remarkable man. Those of us who are on this recording now are going to quickly introduce ourselves, and then we'll go right into the reason we've gathered. So, Bill, would you say first?
I'm Bill Fern. I knew Paul before we went to kindergarten. We were friends our whole lives and shared many good times, many secrets, childhood and otherwise. And I spoke to him on the day before he passed away.
Okay. Bill, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I know you by way of Paul because he talked about you all the time, along with Marvin. So I feel some kindred spirit amongst you. I'm David Kaplan. I first met Paul in 1960 when he was the cantor at the Free Synagogue of Westchester. Leon Jick was the rabbi, two giants in my life. Paul trained me for my bar mitzvah. And since one never forgot Paul when one met him, I have never forgotten him. I saw him last a year ago in Kansas City. I went to visit him and I knew it would be the last time I would see him. And I'm sad to be correct about that. I live in Blue Hill, Maine, and we've been friends since 1960. I've loved him all these years and I will continue to love him.
I'm Deborah Lerner.
I'm Bruce Lerner. We've been friends with Paul since he came to Kansas City in 1979. He became just like part of our family. With us for most of the holidays. And for 20 years, I was his substitute at the Yehuda, and I really got to know him very closely. And we've and he helped train our children and help them grow up too. We miss him.
Dick?
I'm Dick Botten, Richard Botten. I know Paul since 1955, and we had a wonderful relationship as colleagues. And very often we would joke around well, I'll tell you about that later. But he was a wonderful man, and we spoke very often, and we loved each other as friends and as brothers.
Howard?
I'm Howard Silbersher, Paul's first cousin, his father, Louis, who I loved, and my father, Benjamin, who nobody could ever forget, who are biological brothers. Their journey from Lublin, Poland, and back again should have been made into a miniseries or a Netflix film. It's just astonishing that they ever made it. Just want to make a quote that my Zeta, their father, in the early 20th century, Marvin Silbersher told me this, my cousin, Paul's brother, when they lived in Lublin, which I visited in 2008, there were pogroms, there was anti-Semitism, there was persecution of Jews. Our Zeta said, if we don't get out of here, they're going to kill us all. And had he not had the strength and the momentum and the motivation to get out at that time, Paul wouldn't have been here. Marvin, Shirley, Erica, me, and the whole gang, we wouldn't be here. We would have been burned at Majdanek down the road. But Paul and I were friends. He first showed me how to use a tennis racket. He was my older cousin. And then we had a hiatus of many years, but we found each other again in 2004 when I actually found a Silbersher living in Australia, whom Simone and I visited. We found Marvin Silbersher.
Howard, I want you to save those reflections for later.
Paul's first cousin, okay.
All right, Jack?
Well, I also met Paul in 1960 when he was at the Free Synagogue with Leon Jick, and we became very, very close friends and saw each other on a continuing basis. And I really met very few people who had the range of capacities that he had. Almost everywhere you turned, he handled it better than anybody else. Whether it was tennis, he circumcised both of my children. And he took over Cedar Knolls where I was the chaplain, and just a remarkable person, and most of all, a great friend.
Ken?
Ken Sigmund, and Paul has been my cantor. He's been my teacher, and most of all, he's been my friend.
Marvin?
I have known Paul for 78 years. I met him in 1942 with Bill Fern in Bill Fern's house. For those 78 years, the two of us have been the closest friends that either of us have ever had. I will give you details later.
Good.
Every conceivable event of anyone's life.
Troy?
Hi, I'm Troy Miller from Kansas City. Paul and I have known each other for 40 years almost, and family. And one of the most proud things that we've done, besides him being my family, is we worked on some community singing projects in the inner city with Michael was involved with that. So.
And most importantly, Ricky?
I'm enjoying this so much. Ricky Silbersher, the firstborn of the four, and the one who is leading Dad across this threshold to back home where he lays now.
Thank you, Ricky. And we're going to have a very attenuated notion of a memorial service, and and more elaborate reflections on our connections to Paul in this experience before us now. And we're going to start with Dick and S-I-N-I, Psalm 121.
Esainai el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim ba'aretz Ayiten lamot raglecha al yanum shomrecha hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael Adonai shomrecha Adonai tzilcha al yad yaminecha Yom Hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra yishmor et nafshecha Adonai yishmorcha Seitcha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam.
I will lift up my eyes unto the mountains. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from the Eternal who made heaven and earth. God will not suffer your foot to be moved. The one that keeps you will not slumber. Behold, the one that keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Eternal is your keeper. God is your shade upon your right hand. The sun shall not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Eternal shall keep you from all evil. God shall keep your soul. God shall guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. This reflection is on a matter of a elaboration of an offering by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Paul and Ralph didn't know each other, but I do think it captures some of the essence of the man we've gathered to remember. He has achieved much, who has lived well, laughed often, and loved with full heart, who has gained the respect of the wise and the trust of the young, who has filled a place, accomplished some task, who has left the world better than he found it, who has appreciated the true and the beautiful, who has looked for the good in others and given of the good he had, whose life was inspiration, whose memory becomes a benediction. A small aside, Paul and I, who worked together for 21 years, always wanted me to change that last line, whose memory is a benediction. He wanted it to say, whose memory becomes a blessing. So I finally make the change today, whose memory becomes a blessing. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar binotesha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni. If you want, you're welcome to join me in the old-fashioned translation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside
still waters.
He restoreth my
soul.
He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me.
Comfort me.
Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil.
My cup runneth
over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days
of my life.
and I shall
I
dwell
shall live in
in
the
the house of the Lord
Lord
forever. And while forever is quite a long time, we now have a moment of time to offer some personal reflections about the man
Those are the
that all of us are very much aware will be insufficient for the task at hand. Nonetheless, we plunge in. Bill, if you would lead us, please, in your commentary.
Well, I spoke yesterday to Paul directly at the funeral. I think Ricky, we're all, aside from Marvin, was anybody here? Nobody here was there, were
Oh,
they?
you can share that though. The same. You can share what you said yesterday. I think everybody's just a tidy version of what you want to share. That's of the heart.
Okay. Well, why don't I read what I said at the funeral yesterday? I think it says pretty much what I would normally say. I called Paul Pinney. After a succession of teachers at Hebrew school, we finally got one who stayed. And she was the one who began to call Paul by his Hebrew name Pinchas and me by my Yiddish nickname Velvel. We soon started using those names outside of Hebrew school, and I shortened Pinchas to Pinny, and he was that to me ever since. Here are a few memories I have of him, because it was our childhood primarily that we shared up through high school. I remember in elementary school in that little town, that school is still there. When it rained, Paul used to come to school with his father's big black umbrella and wearing big black rubbers that we all used in those days to save our shoes. I remember one rainy day catching sight of him from behind as he walked down the road, down the street. The only thing visible moving was this big black umbrella over a pair of walking black rubbers, one on each side. That umbrella seemed to move slowly by itself, but I knew it was him that was in there. I remember a Purim when we took a big tin basin from the basement kitchen into the shul upstairs for the Megillah reading. This was Paul's idea. He took the basin and a few wooden spoons. We got ready in the back row, and when they started the Megillah, we waited and waited until Haman's name was read, and it was time to make some noise. He didn't use a grogger. Instead, he beat the big tin wash tub like a drum. The booming was so satisfying. I soon joined in on the tub. Then he had a better idea. He never said a word about it. After the next Haman and there was noise and everybody became quiet, ready to continue the Megillah, the reader just about took a deep breath and was just about to start when suddenly from the back row came boom. He was startled by the delayed boom of the wash basin drum. We stopped the whole service for a while. Things calmed down until the next Haman and the next set of groggers in the wash basin, and then the delayed surprise boom. We had a wonderful time with 4 or 5 of those until Paul's father, Ricky's grandfather, Louis, who was standing next to the reader, had just about enough. We got a lecture, and that was the end of the booms. But for 10-year-olds, it was still quite a triumph. After Bar Mitzvah, Paul's father decided that as Kohen, it was time for him to begin to duchen the priestly blessing at the end of the high holiday Musaf. And since my father was Levi and he and Louis were very close friends, he performed the traditional role of helper to the Kohanim. So they, in good time, so they would get back at the moment they were needed. We all four met downstairs at the basement kitchen sink. My father poured water 3 times over the hands of his father, very, very slowly and ceremoniously, and I copied, pouring water 3 times over Paul's hands. I used to get teased by Paul very often because I was supposed to wash his hands. But we secretly both loved continuing that ancient family tradition. We had some funny family true stories that I still love, like the time his mother locked our fathers and a few of the painters and several other people in the cellar of Louis' paint store. They couldn't get out. And they spent the night down there playing cards and smoking. It was all they could do. There were no cell phones, nothing else. But we had the grandest time thinking about our parents stuck in the basement with with just a paint can and an empty paint can on the corner to deal with baser necessities and playing cards all till early morning. Before Paul died, the day before I spoke to him on the phone, he couldn't answer. But he did respond, the nurse told me, and so he understood. We talked about when we'd get together sometimes, or I talked about getting together again sometime soon, perhaps in Gan Eden. He got there before I did, of course. But I told him, I said, when it's my turn and my Nilat sight is over, I expected to find him next to Avram at the gates of Gan Eden, and to be sure they let me in too. I was counting on him. There was a saying I came across that I read to him. I thought it was appropriate. 2 sayings, actually. The first was, friends are the angels who raise us when our wings can no longer remember how to fly. Because that was how we saw each other. And the other was, a raindrop that falls on your cheek is the kiss of someone who lives up there and is thinking of you. So I said to him on that phone call, I said, Penny, the next time I'm caught without an umbrella, feeling drops of soft, gentle rain, I'll know that you're thinking of me, and I shall think of you. With love, from Velvel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's gorgeous.
I'm sorry, who? Me?
David Kaplan.
Me.
David.
Thank you, Bill. One of the things I'm struck by listening to what I've heard thus far is we've all gone to many funerals in our lives. And you know that at most of the funerals we go to, there are plenty of people who don't much care for the dear departed in their various ways, but that is not the case amongst the people gathered here. And this is a group of people who dearly love this dearly beloved man. And it's a sad moment, but I'm very grateful to be here to share amongst all of us our love and terrible sense of loss for this extraordinary and remarkable man. It's sad that there aren't hundreds here, for he touched hundreds and hundreds of lives. My memories of Paul go back a long way in my life and are many and varied. Most of all, I'll remember his warmth and how present he was whenever we were together. He was not a man who could easily be forgotten. I'm convinced he had that same profound effect on everybody with whom he came in contact, but of course I'm biased. He was fully engaged in his life, and he had that most wonderful sense of humor that we all remember, and he had it right up to the end. We would talk endlessly about politics, the magnolias in Mount Vernon, his family, his children, his parents. It's why I know so many of you, because I've heard about them, heard about you over and over again. His old friends from Milburn and women would occasionally crop up in the conversation every now and again. And always his love for things, his hope, and his regrets. In these last years, we would talk very often and spend sometimes several hours on the phone. Inevitably, we would sing together, which would be the thing we most often shared. We would make up songs and sing in dialects, and we would laugh and laugh like two kids. We would never run out of things to talk about. And when we ran out of things to talk about, we'd sing some more. And we would inevitably return to those days in Mount Vernon, heady days in Mount Vernon, where in 1960, as a little kid, he tutored me for my bar mitzvah. I was dragged kicking and screaming to that until I met Paul Silbersher, and suddenly they became happy days for me, and I hope for him too. It was from him that I learned to chant the prayers that I now chant and sing the songs that I still sing, and love the liturgy and love Judaism. That has been an ever-present part of my life to this day. He was an impressive man with an endless sense of curiosity about everything, a wide range of interests, and possessed of a powerful searching intelligence. Most of all, and I think we all share the same feeling, most of all, he was my friend. A loyal, loving friend for all these years, always patient, always present, always loving. And then there is that voice. There will always be that voice. That voice will live in my head and in my heart forever. There was a time in my life when I used to think he sang for God, and I'm not sure I was wrong about that. I think he sang for all of us. He wrapped us all in the love he felt for everything and everyone. But for me, there's no place to put this loss. We all try and put things in their proper place. There's no proper place for this. I don't know where to go with this. For me, it is that big. His light is an eternal light. He used to like to say, nothing missing, nothing broken. But now something is missing and something is broken. And I will miss him forever.
Thank you, David. It's gorgeous.
You know, listening to all of you, I feel like even though I've never met many of you in person, you know, I've invariably, over the last several months, I was with him when he talked to you on the phone. You know, Bill and Marvin and Dick, and of course, Deborah and Bruce were kind of connected in Kansas City through our families. So, you know, a man or woman are recognized by the service they provide, and obviously Paul was a servant. He served his congregation as a cantor with a voice that no one will ever forget. It was a beautiful professional voice, which I'm hearing as I'm talking to you. He also was a rabbi to two congregations, and he was a teacher. And I feel so fortunate because for the last 5 months of his life, it was like Sundays with Paul. I visited him every Sunday, started visiting him after he was out of his rehab. And occasionally we would get together throughout the years. I met Paul when he was a cantor and began to going to a Saturday educational session. We had a small service. There were about 10 or 15. And he got me coming to the synagogue every weekend because he was such an incredible teacher. In fact, my 3 daughters thought I was a born-again Jew because I kept going, and I wasn't that particularly religious before then. And then throughout the years, occasionally we'd have lunch. And then about, I guess, 5-6 months before he died, I started visiting him every Sunday. And he said, Ken, he said, why don't you let me teach you Hebrew? When you attended Temple B'nai Yehuda, they didn't do bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs. He said, wouldn't it be great if you can become a bar mitzvah in your age, at your age of 77 or 78? He said, I'd love to teach you. Well, I enjoyed Paul so much that I said, Paul, if you're going to be my teacher, I need to pay you something. He said, no, Ken. Oh, no. No, this is going to be as much for me as it will be for you. And that's the way it was. It was like Tuesdays with Paul. And I guess I enjoyed him as my teacher and my friend for those last 5 or 6 months. Not only did we begin to get me along the road of learning Hebrew, but we had a great time. In this man, I saw a sense of humility, because in our Sunday meetings, he would talk about, situations, and he was humble to share with me things that he may have regretted, but he had so much patience. That was remarkable, because, he said, now, Ken, don't get impatient with yourself, because you're starting your journey into Hebrew in the 3rd grade. Well, if I had a particular Sunday where I did pretty well, he said, Ken, you're moving up to the 5th grade. And he said, I'm half Italian. So he said, Ken, he said, you're the first person I've ever taught who says Hebrew with an Italian accent. And every Sunday we would spend part of our time talking to each other in an Italian dialogue. But he was a confidence builder. Never was I concerned that I wasn't enough. And I became president of my synagogue. And it wasn't something I was really comfortable with. They just needed to have someone step in, and I hadn't served on the board. But he met with me at the beginning of my term, and I was a little bit lacking in confidence, but he made me feel that I was going to be enough for that 2 years. So he was a charming man. He was humble. And the other thing that I noticed, he always honored others. If he felt that he was mistreated, he never really went after the character. He only talked about the act or the disappointment, which I think it's so easy when we're upset with situations, we go to the person. He never did that. He had great laughter. And, I would, like he said, I want you to learn Hatikva, to read that in Hebrew. But it also gave him a chance to sing it. And till the week or month before he died, he still had that beautiful voice. And so I feel so fortunate. I was the one that got the joy out of 5 months. If it was good for him, it was doubly good for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Marvin, your turn.
Paul and I were best friends, really best friends, for 75 years. Ever since we met together at Bill Fern's house in 1942, the year after Pearl Harbor. So for the next 5 years, we shared Hebrew school and our synagogue and our congregation. We shared the most magnificent principal of our Hebrew school, whose name was Mrs. Hoffman, who cared, who shared, who taught, who listened, who was a role model for us. Unfortunately, when the time came and she passed away, at her burial, there were only her daughter, Warren Gray, and myself. We did our own service as we laid her to rest. We shared innumerable things. For example, Friday night. This is the kind of stuff Ricky would like to hear. Friday night, before services, when we were done with school, we always went to Paul's house. And we would go into the kitchen, and there we would find that his mother had made a big mound of chopped liver, which we were not allowed to touch. We figured out, however, that if we shoveled underneath and we took some chopped liver from inside, she would never know. And so when it came to be service at Friday night at her house, it seemed strange to her. What happened to my chopped liver? We looked at each other. I don't know. I'm not sure. I wasn't there. You children, I'm going to get you. Next Friday, the same thing. And we were at services together every Friday night. Friday night in the synagogue in Milburn, you can't imagine how small it was. We had a caretaker, a man who used to get drunk and who didn't do his job. So therefore, if it snowed that night and the synagogue was on a corner, Paul and I shoveled the snow. When the services were over and we had an Oneg Shabbat, and the caretaker was supposed to clean up, he was drunk somewhere. Paul and I cleaned up everything from services after Friday night. And Saturday morning continued services. It was a junior congregation. We had Hebrew school together. We studied together. We learned prayer. We learned Hebrew together as teenagers. And every Saturday, unless the weather was impossible, the two of us would walk. For 5 years, we walked through the reservation every single weekend. And believe it or not, as children, 14, 15, 16 years old, we talked about life, family, health, the hereafter, God, sex, marriage, children, you name the subject. And we seriously talked about that for hours as we walked through the reservation. And now that I'm living back near the reservation and I drive up through it, he's with me there during all of those 5 years. Our synagogue life continued on all the occasions of holidays. Came the sukkahs. Sukkahs, you had to build a sukkah. We didn't have laborers and people and a whole staff and a lot of volunteers. His father built the sukkah. Well, he needed some help. Paul and I, and if Marvin was around, we helped build a sukkah every single year. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, during the services, his father brought us up to the bima without asking anyone else's permission. And he showed us what to do, and we helped the davening. And he taught us what the prayers were. He taught us the melodies, and we sang and we prayed, literally prayed together. You know, not just wrote. When it came time for Pesach, each of us had our own family. We had a Seder, a full Seder. We did the whole Haggadah, the whole 9 yards. When my Seder was done, I got on my bicycle, which was near where our new shul is now, in Milburn, and I would ride my bicycle back to Whittingham Terrace. I would then go to really see the Seder, the ending of the Seder, with Paul, his mother, and his father, and his brother, until 11, 12 o'clock at night. Every single Pesach. Then I got back on my bicycle when I came back home. No buses, no cars, nobody picked me up, no cell phone. But we shared together the celebration of Pesach. In 1947, Paul took off to Tulane University. And that's the year that I also met Francine. And she and I got very close. And we were together from 1948 to 53. And Paul visited us wherever we were. When I went to summer school at the University of Wisconsin, where I took 2 summer sessions in order to accelerate out of undergraduate school, Paul could continue to write to me. Listen to this. Paul knew that for all these years, the one and only person I ever loved was Francine. But that summer was the summer that Francine and I didn't see each other. But next door to my fraternity house where I slept, there was a sorority house. And there was a girl in the sorority house. And we got very close together. And I really thought I fell in love with Nancy. That was her name. And I wrote to Paul. Paul wrote me a long letter, which I kept for all my life, explaining to me how important Francine was to my life, but that he understood that I found someone else. But he said, Marvin, I want you to consider something. This other girl was Francine's college roommate who had come there for the summer also. And Paul said, the only reason you are with this other girl is because it keeps you closer to Francine. That's the kind of closeness and openness that we could share with each other. And when I went on to Penn, he visited me at Penn, at my fraternity house, when I was marching in the marching band. When I went on to Harvard, he visited us up in Cambridge as well. He was a constant presence with us. And yes, we shared the sadness together. We shared in our young years 4 significant funerals. One was Max Alper. He was the Balcora of our synagogue, who we all knew as a human being. And he died, and we went to his funeral in a little funeral chapel on Chancellor Avenue in Newark. And it was the first time we saw a plain pine box with a black Jewish flag. We shared that first funeral. And then we lost our family physician, a young man, Dr. Kleinberger. And I was so angry that God had taken Dr. Kleinberger that I wouldn't even sit with Paul during services on Friday night. I sat alone in the back because I was angry with God. That's how he taught us to be a part of life, a part of God, a part of religion. Then a contemporary of ours, Mrs. Huffman's young son, who had recently been married, had a medical emergency. And the emergency physician who came to the house gave him the wrong medication and killed him.
Mhm.
And we went to that funeral together. And the fourth one, after Alper, after Israel Hoffman, after the doctor, was Billy's sister, Ethel. A young, lovely, married woman with a child, who was a magnificent pianist as well. And through all of these, Paul had to help us find justification for how God could do these things. When it came time for 1953 and I married Francine, he, of course, was my best man. But I'll tell you a funny part of the story. When the wedding was over on a Sunday night, it was like 11, 12 o'clock at night, then Francine and I had to go for our wedding night to a hotel in New York. You got to understand, in 1953, we had, no matter how much time we spent with each other, we had no physical relationship. I mean, none. Love did not include sex. Here I was on my way for my wedding night, and Paul was driving us at 20 miles an hour, and there was no traffic. And years later, he said, I just couldn't bear to let you go. And that's how I got to my wedding night. In the years that followed, when he was in Pound Ridge, Francine and I went up to visit with him. And we stayed overnight, but they didn't have an extra bed. So we slept on the floor next to the fireplace. Well, as Ricky may remember, those were the days they raised Great Danes. And as Francine and I lay on the floor sleeping, 2 big Great Danes came over to us to see who we were and to lick us. And Paul says, don't worry, they wouldn't hurt you. It's really okay. So we continued on after that in Pound Ridge, and all the things that brought me to my profession and to his profession until 1981, when I left Francine and I moved to a little town in New Jersey called Hope. And there I lived for 3 years alone. And Paul helped counsel me in living like that, in leaving the most magnificent family and the most magnificent woman anyone could ever want to be married to. And he helped me through that.
Marvin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Because we have others that need to speak, would you mind reflecting a little bit, rather than on a biographical journey, the qualities that summarize him for you, and then we need to come to Howard. We're going to run out of time for recording.
Unfortunately, I couldn't hear everything you said.
What I'm asking is if you would be so kind as, rather than as going through a life.
I'm just finished. Just finishing to tell you that after all of being best man, and marrying my daughter as he officiated. He then co-officiated at my last wedding as well. And the last time that we were together, other than my visiting him, was when I was at the bat mitzvah of Scout, where he flew from Kansas, Scout flew from Australia, and I went to Connecticut, and there we shared the bat mitzvah of Scout, my closest, dearest friend and human being. Thank you for the time, Michael.
Thank you. Howard, you're stuck with us.
My name is Howard Silbersher. I was Paul's first cousin. His father, Louis, whom I'm sure many of you know, a wonderful man, and my father, Benjamin, not unforgettable, were biological brothers. Paul used to mimic my father out of love and respect. To meet my father is to never forget him. Paul and I were friendly as I was growing up. I used to love to go from Manhattan on the Lackawanna train to Millburn to see my wonderful Uncle Louis and Aunt Rose, and stay in their house on Whittingham Terrace, and then the other place where they moved down the street behind the store. And Paul and I were not that friendly then, but we had a hiatus of about 25 years. Somehow we just didn't connect. But I found, it's a long story, I found the Silbersher family living in Australia, whose father was born in Lublin, Poland, and they were also Kohanim like we are. How can we not be related? So Simone and I went to Australia in 2004. They're also passionate tennis fans. And while we were there, they wanted to know more about the Silbersher. So I said, well, there's Marvin and Shirley and Paul. So they Googled Marvin, and there he was. And when I came home, I called Marvin at Lake Apatcong, and we became friendly again. And Paul called me, and we've been talking ever since and engaging one another. Incidentally, Marvin Fish, you mentioned that small synagogue in Millburn. I was there many times, and I remember my cousin Shirley's wedding there. I also remember the new synagogue that my Uncle Louis helped, was a spearhead to build. I think Paul should be very fortunate to have such friends who feel so passionately about him. That's a rare gift, especially in today's world where even though we grew up without cell phones and without all this internet and texting and all this crap, I think we communicated much better in the 40s and 50s than we do today. You call people, they don't return the call, they don't answer, they don't respond. It's obnoxious. Anyway, I know how you feel about Paul. Also, I said a lot of Haftorahs in my synagogue after I was an adult, and he coached me. I called him up. We went over the Haftorah on the phone. He went over my trope, and he made me say a good Haftorah even better. One anecdote is that after a tragedy in my life, I just turned away from Judaism for about 8 or 10 years. But I came back when I met a wonderful Chabad rabbi in Pennsylvania who became very friendly with me and who I learned with. And when I told him my cousin was a Reform rabbi in Cantor in Kansas City, the Chabads are kind of arrogant. They think that unless you're Orthodox, you're not Jewish, which is a very obnoxious attitude. Anyway, Paul and my Chabad rabbi, his name is Aryeh, had many conversations on a three-way. And my Chabad Rabbi Aryeh was amazed at Paul's knowledge of Judaism and analysis. I said, why shouldn't he be just as knowledgeable as you? You know, just because you went to yeshiva for 100 years doesn't mean to say everybody else is not as knowledgeable and as passionate about Judaism as you are. I think he learned something from that. But I will miss Paul. There's a great sense of loss I've been feeling. I loved having talks with him. The fact that he knew my parents and my sister, who was a very sad case, made a great, strong connection. I had a great deal of admiration for him and his brother. They were mentors and role models. I loved Louis and Rose, who you all know, or most of you know. And I want to give a big shout out to Erica and Scout for what they have done to bring all this together and to be with Paul when he passed on, so he was not alone. Big shout out to them. That must have taken an enormous amount of energy, and they should remember that for the rest of their lives. They did a mitzvah to be with him and to whatever they did to straighten out his affairs instead of letting the state come in and auction it off or whatever they do. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But I will miss Paul. He was my cousin. He was my friend. He was my conscience. He was my rabbi, and I will miss him. And I thank you for sharing this all with all the rest of you. And again, Eric and Scout, wherever you are hiding behind that ladder, you should feel proud of yourself and carry this for the rest of your life. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Yeah, all the way from Rome.
Yes.
Very fortunate here, so.
Well, first of all, I feel I should be thanking all of you for bringing, in a way, for making it a reality in the sense of making Paul very real. I mean, in this respect, I really am grateful to you. When you get to be my age, and you're not that, I'm not that young, our memory sort of plays tricks. But I did meet Paul in 1960 and was really very close to him till 1972 when I left the Union of American Hebrew Congregations to take a pulpit in Dallas. And then one thing led to another, and we really didn't have, we contact, but we didn't have the same intensity of relationship after that, which I think I always felt as a great loss. Because Paul was in many ways an ideal for me. He was able to do all the things that I couldn't do. I was not in any way a sportsman, and it wasn't anything that he couldn't do. I mean, he was an outstanding tennis player. He knew how to deal with animals, He decided to learn, I think, Ehrenkrantz, I think, was the one that taught him how to do circumcisions. And he was outstanding. He had a great voice. He knew it all. And the thing that I loved about his voice is that he could imitate anybody. He had this great capacity. Once he played tricks on me, he would call me and pretend to be somebody else. He fooled me because he had such a perfect accent. I couldn't tell that it was really him. But I used to go to his house very, very often with the Great Danes. There was a kind of larger than life quality about it. But I think one has to also understand how serious he was. He was playful. He had a great sense of humor. He had tremendous compassion. Look, the fact that he ended up taking over Cedar School, they gave him that position, which is unbelievable, unbelievable. But he was really interested in trying to find out what Judaism was all about. And that, in my opinion, was one of his driving interests. Very often, we would have talks which had to do really with what do we really believe? In other words, what do we believe? Why do we believe it? How do we live it? And I always thought that he should do more than what he was doing in the world of Judaism. And that's one of the reasons that I actually encouraged him to study so that we could ordain him. And I'm afraid that didn't go too well with many rabbis. But I felt that he had a great, great love of Judaism. He had an increasing knowledge of Judaism. he was interested in studying. I got him onto Hermann Cohen, and Hermann Cohen is not easy. I've only spent now, I would say, at least the last 50 or so years studying Hermann Cohen. And it's only in the last few months that I think I'm beginning to understand. You know, it's like that wonderful story about this person says, "Do you Jews believe in immortality?" He said, "Oh yeah." I says, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." "Oh yeah, you want to? I can even show it to you. You can show me immortality?" And the guy says, "Sure, come with me." So he takes him to this congregation, a little congregation, and there's this Jew studying the Talmud. He says, "There, that's immortality." "What do you mean? I can go to any shul and see Jews studying the Talmud. What makes that immortality?" He says, "Now he understands it." That's the difference. And so you have this sense that he was always searching to find what it all comes down to. What does it really mean? Why is it important? And he had a love of Jews and Judaism. And that sort of organized his life, I think. I really do. I think he loved Michael. He very often would call me and tell me what a wonderful relationship he had with him. I'm sure he spoke to me about you. And here, in a sense, I'm meeting you for the first time. It's been wonderful. But I loved him, and I think he loved life. And he lived a life that was a blessing to so many of us. And I'm just grateful that in those years that we were together, it made a difference, I think, to me and to so many others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, it's your turn to share whatever you're able to at the moment, and then I'll be our concluding speaker, and then we'll have a prayer or two to wrap up.
Is that me you're talking to?
It certainly is.
Troy, did you?
Troy's going to be our amanuensis for posterity.
Okay, well, wow. Sitting at everybody, it's like a campfire, and I feel like I'm sitting in a group that I don't want to leave. So I've been busy listening to you, and now to shift gears. I had to take notes, because otherwise I would wander and it wouldn't be helpful. I used a pad that Dad, the yellow notepad. You all are familiar with the reams and reams of yellow notepads that he would scribble on. For funerals, weddings, shopping lists, whatever. How do I start? I'm 60 years old. I've seen my father through every phase of his life, but from the inside, as a child who was being formed by him, had needs of him, some met, some not, but learned how to form myself because of him. I was there through 3 wives. I was there in every congregation he ever had. I was in every home he ever had, including his childhood homes, which were very important to me. So I know my father probably better than anybody who's living to tell. We are not. None of us are going to gloss over his shortcomings and his frailties around relationship, around ability to be truly present in this sort of non-intellectual way. It's hard for him. But I love what you said, Jack, about how he was searching and how passionately he searched. And this is, I'm sure, what he gave me. He also chose a woman to be a mother who taught me how to be grounded. That's the Pope calling. So
I thought it was off.
So my mother taught me how to have grounded expectations of my dad, and it probably was the best way to serve the combination of things that my dad taught me to be and to feel and to think about and to channel and to experience, but to weight myself down with the earthly function and expectation and the ability to have boundaries that were important to establish in relationship that dad wasn't quite able to teach. The things that he was able to teach that are so profound are everything we're all feeling. And a lot of it is just his natural joy. And one of the things that happened in this last 2 months of taking care of him, being the eldest and the one who's most capable and desired most to sort of be his rabbi, his guide through this moment and this chapter, but also just to be in charge of his life and to value him. And in every facet is that I was able to, when Scout and I, my daughter, who spent herself at the burial yesterday, so I'm sorry is not here today, as well as his sister Shirley, who it was hard for her yesterday, so I think it was enough. But what we found when we were both there in Kansas City these last couple of weeks with him before, through, and after, was that his whole life, you know, I touched every facet of his whole life in his house, and like peeling an onion, I was able to see how many stacks of cards there were out of love for so many people constantly in his life loving him, who you all are now. So I'm able to, he's brought me more life than I ever knew he was going to bring me by bringing you all into my world, the community that he built. Thousands of people who know and love him, who are popping up on his phone that I'm still caretaking, and who are trying to find their way towards him. And this group that we have now, that's most intimate around him, that he would be most blessed to feel is caretaking his journey, is to me. His gift is his bequeathment of community that he's built. And it's such a deep and profound community. And I'm privileged that it's widening my world so much. And thank you, Dad, for that. I have to touch, for those who don't know him as well, I do have to turn to the yellow pad to share some vignettes. And Michael, please forgive me for a little more, 10 minutes more. I think so. The earliest shape I think I took has to be music. With his rich voice, which has never been surpassed, with my own complaints about him leaving banana peels in the planter, or the complaints a daughter can have, his voice has never been surpassed as far as channeling the ages, the wisdom of our people, and combining it with modernism, with the patience of a saint. The sound of him has always, and it's been mine because he's my dad. So he put me to sleep at night with a Shema, and he'd kneel down at my bed, and he would have the Shema, and there was always a topic of the day. What did you do today? Or something that most that we wanted to talk about. And the one that I remember that blew my mind and changed my life was when I said something about space. I maybe was 10, and he said, I said, it's a good thing space is sort of finite, or we know what space is. And he said very patiently, okay, well, what if we build a huge stone wall all around space? And then what's outside of that? And I lay there, and it blew my mind open to realize there was always another perspective, that there was a wider and bigger perspective. And he challenged me in such a gentle way. And it changed my life, and I'm sure it's defined who I am in my thinking. I say the Shema now with that same love to my daughter. Dad's ability to, like you say, Jack, to embody with his voice and to imitate. So after he came home from work teaching tennis all summer, he was like the tan cantor, with the stripes of the sweatband on his head and his wrist while he was on the dais. But he'd come home and we'd imitate for the afternoon, people from the tennis club, how they served, how they volleyed, and laughed really hard at the accuracy of it, but also from the love of observation. He was able to observe people with such affection that he could imitate them with affection, caricature them with love. And I love that he he could do that. I love that he taught me that, to observe. And I turned into an artist with him and my grandpa Louis. And my greatest strength is caricaturing. I'm a very strong caricaturist because I'm able to grab onto the thing that most defines people, that gives them the character that we love. And he taught me affection for observation and the power of observation. Mel Brooks, 2,000-year-old man. How can I read this to him as he was lying there on morphine in his home with me there, with Scout. We played him the 2,000-year-old man, and we see his tiny grin of the affection, of the joy and the naucus that would bring him, the deep knowledge that wisdom, the humor like Mel Brooks can bring over the soul. He gave me that. And, his ability to, I lost track of the song, the music and everything. He gave me such a beautiful sound. I have a gorgeous voice too. I don't have a stage presence, and I don't have the drive to the stage and the presence to deliver, but I do have a voice thanks to Dad. Dad has channeled to my daughter Scout, who's a magnificent performer, a very beautiful singer, and a very natural performer. And I look at her, and she takes everyone away. People look at her, and she goes somewhere like Dad goes somewhere, went somewhere. And she has that, she carries that. And I hope she'll continue to do that more in her life as she becomes a film director and perhaps comes back to music as well. And finally, it's the talking. It's the reflecting, it's the hours of conversation we'd have every time across all our years. It's his patience with frustration as a kid where he couldn't sustain a marriage that gave a sense of safety and family, couldn't do. That was his trick knee. But he gave me the ability to reflect and to ask questions and to find out who I was through the conversation of connection with him. And he never battled he just asked into it more. He listened, and he was able to hold me in places. And I was able to then eventually hold him as well in places most people, I suppose, could not, and love him into the challenges of that. And also religion. He didn't put on me that I had to answer to my Kohen status by protocol, by responsibility to protocol. He allowed me to have a ham sandwich, God forbid. He allowed me with my mother, who gave up at their divorce, gave up the kosher household, and we went to Provincetown and we had our lobster and our crab. He never thought I was any less Jewish, I suppose. He allowed for me. And this is what he was able to mix religion for people to say, find your spirit, love what you come from, love what you wrap around your head and your wrist, and love into a sense of belonging, but know who you are. And for that, I love you, Daddy. And I'm so happy that we're together, loving him together like this.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
You have given more than a little bit of testimony already. The Talmud was right when it said words that come from the heart enter the heart. And like so many in this gathering, and among those who may view this later, I've spent the last number of days reflecting on Paul and on my long, although not as long as a number of you, my long connection with him. And in sorting through an attic filled with memories, I was intrigued by a notion that unwitted came to mind. To wit, a comment by the 20th century giant Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, someone whom both Paul and I admired. It seems of the moment. Heschel instructs, all animals are satisfied when their needs are met. Only human beings, however, have a need to be a need, or to be needed. Somehow that seemed key, if you will, as an organizing principle. For Paul, I believe, had a restless and endless and wonderful need to be needed. And so many, oh my, so many were, more accurately are, the wonderful beneficiaries of that soulful, that soul-filled and filling desire of his to connect, to inspire, to lift up, to make a difference. For as you've heard and as you know, he did such over and over again, and why not add a few more overs to that list? I suspect that desire also helps clarify the many elements of his career, or more precisely, careers. A drive he embodied in every setting. Tennis pro, check. Moel, oh my goodness, check. Social worker, teacher, leader, interfaith worker, even a bit of a pioneer in there, check, check, and check again. Cantor extraordinaire, of course. And as a rabbi who led 2 communities after his retirement from B'nai Yehuda, check again. And as a full-time iconoclast, perhaps most of all. For along with that repertoire of engagements, he loved to schmooze and ruminate, for he loved the world of ideas and a world filled with people. In fact, from my perspective, he was a unique and spectacular embodiment of that combination. As he relished the insights of the mind, he was devoted to connections of the heart. In short, Paul was always looking for how he could and would make a difference, and what a difference he made. All of which means we were more, because Paul Silbersher was part of our lives, and we are more, because that is still true. Not the way we want, simply the way it is. The way it is, without any question, means Zichrono Livracha. His memory, as assuredly as his life, will always and ever be a blessing among us. I used to
Thank you.
Paul and I would do together with this phrase, can't help but do it now. As for now, a miracle is over. A unique and precious human being is no more to our sight. A new miracle begins. Our tradition calls it shalom, peace, to which I can only add, amen.
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 Virtually, I'm encouraging any who will listen now or be part of this to do a virtual standing as Cantor Richard Botten Dick leads us in El Mali Rachamim, the memorial prayer, and we'll conclude with Kaddish, and how could we not, with Lechi Lach that Bruce and Deborah will lead us in.
El Male Rachamim Shochein Ba'meromim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashechina Im kedoshim utehorim kezohar harakia mazhirim et nishmat Pinchas ben Aryelev hakohen sheholach leolamo Bal harachamim Yastireu beseter kenafav leolamim Vitzror bitzror akayim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato V'yanuach B'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
The normal traditional translation talks about Bitzur B'tzur Chaim as the bond of eternal life. But Paul would like the notion that a bitzror is really a web or a network or a connection. In short, that Paul is bound up in the network of so many, many lives. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest unto the soul of Paul Silbersher, who has departed from this world. God of mercy, bring him into your presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be thou his possession, May his repose be peace. And let us say, Amen.
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 At the end of a great performance in Kansas City, invariably, people give a standing ovation. Well, the Kaddish is a way of understanding it as our tradition's standing ovation to a remarkable life. If you'll pray with me and recognize that in the Zoom format, our voices are going to be not coordinated. Zehu. Yit gadal, v'yit gadal, v'alma,
Malchuten. Israel.
Amen. Yehei Shnei
Merabam Avrah, Yolom
Yitbarach
Torah,
Yitma'am
Ramam Vipase,
Yitzhadar
Vipal,
Lam in Kol Tirchata Amen. Shlama Rabba Maya
Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Amen.
It may take a lot of chutzpah to have somebody else sing this song at the end of any experience. But I'm very glad, Deborah and Bruce, that you're going to share this conclusion with Daddy.
To a land that I will show you. To a place you do not know. On your journey I will bless you. And you have been a blessing. You have been a blessing. You have been a blessing. And I shall make your name great. And all shall praise your name. To the place that I will show you. L'simchat chayim, l'simchat chochmah, l'simchat shalom, and you have been a blessing. And you have been a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. To a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lech ilach, on your journey I will bless you. and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lech ilach, to a place that I will show you. L'simchat chayim, l'simchat ahava, l'simchat Torah, l'chilach. And you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing, and you shall be a blessing.